Mr. President, at the outset, I congratulate you on your election as President of the General Assembly in its 79th session. I thank you for responding to our request to resume the 10th Emergency Special Session. United for Peace. Jordan aligns itself with the statements of the Arab Group, OIC, and NAM. Mr. President, our session today convenes to look into the draft resolution tabled by the Brotherly Palestinian delegation in light of the advisory opinion of the ICJ, which was issued in July, concerning the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, in response to the request of the General Assembly, end of 2022. Jordan expresses its full support of the draft resolution, and we invite the Member States to vote in its favor. Mr. President, Jordan considers the advisory opinion of the ICJ a watershed moment in the history of the Palestinian question. The opinion stated what we are aware of, which is that the Israeli occupation is illegal and that the presence of Israeli settlements and settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories is illegal and void, and that the Israeli practices against the Palestinian people languishing under occupation are racist practices in the first place that amount to racial discrimination and apartheid. Mr. President, implementing the ICJ's advisory opinion is an obligation for us as states, international organizations, and international community. In this advisory opinion, the court has reflected the position of international law from the Palestinian question, from the Israeli occupation and the Palestinian right to self-determination, and from the grave Israeli violations of the jus cogens of international law. In the near future, we will see how the content of this advisory opinion will be reflected in the legal procedures that will be adopted by the national and regional courts and by member states against the occupation and against Israeli practices. In line with the advisory opinion and the submission submitted by Jordan before the ICJ, we reaffirm the fact that Israeli policies in the occupied Palestinian territories aim at undermining the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The international community cannot allow this. Therefore, we emphasize the need to compel Israel to implement the advisory opinion in this regard, including ending the ongoing Israeli occupation since June 1967 as soon as possible, and immediately ending all the settlement activities, evacuating the settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories, and ending their arbitrary oppressive practices against the Palestinian people on their occupied territories. Mr. President, we reiterate our full support to the advisory opinion, which compels Israel to restore properties to their legal owners and to provide compensation to those affected by the Israeli practices and policies in the occupied Palestinian territory. We also support the measures included in the Palestinian draft resolution, including ending the import and procurement of goods manufactured in settlements and also ending the provision of weapons to Israel, in addition to ending all measures ending violations aiming at changing the historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem. Refraining from providing support to Israel to continue its crimes and violations against the Palestinian people is not an intellectual luxury. It is a legal obligation on all states and on the international community as a whole. those supporting the settlements should refrain from doing so, and the companies feeding the Israeli killing machinery against the Palestinian people should also refrain from doing so, and those supporting the measures of Israel aiming at creating a new reality on the ground against Palestine should understand that this is bound to fail. Mr. President, the advisory opinion emphasized the unity of the Palestinian territory and the right of return of the Palestinians. It rejected forced displacement. Therefore, there is a need to implement this advisory opinion using all possible legal means by adopting the necessary national legislations, in addition to the individual and collective measures to implement that goal. There is also a need to intensify international efforts to put further pressure on Israel to end their hideous crimes against the Palestinian people in Gaza, which have claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians since the onset of the barbaric Israeli war a year ago. The Security Council and the international community should put pressure on Israel to end the war immediately and to allow the sufficient and sustainable delivery of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip, and to refrain from targeting UN and relief staff, and to implement relevant Security Council resolutions, mainly Resolution 2735. We call upon the international community to take a unified position condemning the ongoing unilateral Israeli practices and their violations of the historic status quo in Jerusalem. The international community should compel Israel and its extremist government to end their violations in the West Bank and policies aiming at dragging the region into a global regional war with devastating consequences. In conclusion, Mr. President, we reiterate the historic and absolute support of Jordan to the right of Palestinians to self-determination and to the establishment of their sovereign independent state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem as a capital, pursuant to relevant UN resolutions and on the basis of the two-state solution, which is the only way to achieve comprehensive peace. We reaffirm the need for Israel to respect the historic status quo of Jerusalem and the Islamic and Christian holy sites in the frame of the Jordanian custodianship on these sites. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Jordan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative